1 million Android devices have a secret backdoor. Definitely tune in to see if you might be impacted by this. Apple is fighting the UK backdoor order that we talked about recently, and Canada's privacy watchdog is probing X, formerly known as Twitter, for its use of personal data in AI models. Welcome to Surveillance Report, where this week I am dedicated to keeping you private and secure with the latest news in the past week. I'm Henry from Techlore, and again, just like I just said, Nate will not be with us this week, but he should hopefully be back next weekend. Before we dive into the highlight story, I want to announce our brand new sponsor, which is SimpleX. Many of you might know SimpleX as an end-to-end encrypted messenger. It has no unique identifiers. You don't need an email. You don't need a phone number. You don't even really set up a username. You kind of create a new invite for every person you talk to. So it really is a very anonymous way of messaging people. It's decentralized, so users can even host their own server if they choose to. It's open source. It's also cross-platform on iOS and Android. And it's also on alternative app stores like F-Droid, and they give you an APK. So it really kind of caters to everybody, with desktop releases in beta, which I've also been testing and has been pretty solid. So we've actually set up and mirrored our Signal group that we have currently for patrons over there as well. And when I say mirror, it's not bridged or anything, but we kind of have this sister community now on SimpleX. So if you join the Patreon for SR, you'll also get access to that as well. And we should have PSAs out by the time this is live. And we also are in the process of setting up a business address, so you can talk to us instead of emailing us and sending us news reports. You can actually message us on SimpleX with a business address there instead. Later on, I'll tell you about version 6.3 at the end of the episode, but in the meantime, let's dive into the highlight story, which is that 1 million third-party Android devices have a secret backdoor for scammers, or frankly, anybody else. This is a pretty big story, and I honestly didn't see it covered too much, which I found really interesting because this is not good. So, gonna go through some quotes in the article here. So there was at least 1 million Android-based TV streaming boxes, tablets, projectors, and after-sale car infotainment systems infected with malware that conscripts them into a scammer-controlled botnet. And all of this activity happens behind the scenes without the owners of compromised devices really knowing that it's happening. So they found this mostly in South America, particularly Brazil. This is like the biggest place that this was happening. And they normally use generic names for these kind of things. So you're gonna find things like TV98 and X96 for different devices. And just to kind of make it clear, this is called Badbox 2.0 is kind of the name that they've coined for this. Now, virtually all of those targeted generic devices are designed using Android's open source operating system source code. So they are running Android, but they run versions of these Android devices that aren't part of Google's formal ecosystem, where it's got like Google's protection where they can scan the device to prevent this kind of stuff. The researchers have highlighted a technique in which the scammers create a benign app. So before I finish out this quote, I want to make something clear that the article doesn't do a good job of doing. This is a very multi-step process. The attack flow is actually extremely complicated. So this isn't just the back door. The back door is kind of just there to leave the door open, but it actually needs to be taken advantage of. So what they do is they post a benign app, like a game, and they post it to the Google Play Store to show that it's been vetted. But then they trick users into downloading nearly identical versions of the app that are not hosted in official app stores and are malicious. They call this an evil twin app, and they've seen this at least 24 times, allowing the attackers to run ad fraud in the Google Play versions of their apps and distribute malware in the imposter apps. So it's like a very multi-pronged approach, and I'll talk about this soon. They also found that the scammers distributed over 200 compromised rebundled versions of popular mainstream apps as yet another way of spreading this kind of scam. So they say, this is the quote here, "As a consumer, you should keep in mind that if the device is too cheap to be true, you should be prepared that there might be some additional surprises hidden in a device. There is no free cheese unless the cheese is in a mousetrap." That's what they say. Now, I went ahead and kind of compiled. They didn't do a very good job of just putting together the attack flow, but I went ahead and tried to compile an attack flow based on what they shared to share with you how this attack actually works when you put it from start to end. So the beginning here is the initial infection, which is you as a user purchased a compromised device which may have a firmware backdoor during a manufacturer or a firmware update. The next step is you actually have to install malware. So the user downloads and installs malware on the device, such as a drive-by download, an evil twin app, or a compromised rebundled version of the popular app, which I covered. From there, the third step is the malware communicates with the firmware backdoor to activate it and establish a persistent presence on the device. So all these things need to happen. The fourth one is remote control. The scammers are going to use the firmware backdoor to remotely control the device, install additional malware, and use the device for various cybercrimes like advertising fraud, click fraud, residential proxy services, and really anything else. I mean, they have control of all these devices. So I wouldn't be surprised if like even botnets aren't out of the question here. And then the fifth step is the scammers can use the device to steal data, like user credentials, financial information, or anything else. So there's like a big, series of steps. This is extremely complex, extremely complicated, and extremely difficult to get rid of once it's happened. You can't just uninstall this. So very interesting thing. Now, we have a lot to discuss with this story. Without Nate, I feel like I ramble more, so hopefully the patrons, you don't get too upset with all the extra stuff we'll do past the highlight story, but you all get in the highlight story, you get my rambles anyway in the public version. So a few notes here. One, buying uncertified, untrusted, sketchy devices. We've seen probably at this point well over a dozen stories over the years that we've done this podcast where really, like, you buy these cheap devices on Amazon or on sketchy used stores, and it comes with malware, or it's just insecure, or it comes with some kind of telemetry that sends data unencrypted to some weird server somewhere else. We've just seen the most bizarre stories with these devices. So I think kind of step one is vet your devices and where you get them. Personally, I love buying used devices. Almost all of the phones I've purchased, like the last 3 phones I purchased were all used. But I did a good job vetting them. I got overall trusted phones. I got phones that I know are really hard to tamper with without it being obvious. I got them from sellers who I was asking, hey, why are you getting rid of this phone? And kind of seeing if they have other posts and seeing if there's anything that's like kind of sketchy about the seller. And then from there, I still factory reset the device when I get it, and I might do just some basic checks on my network to see if there's any weird domains or any kind of weird activity. Now, if you don't feel comfortable doing any of that, I don't think it's bad advice to say you might be someone who just might be better getting a new device. And I hate saying that because there's the e-waste concerns, there's the environmental concerns, but I do think that having good baseline security is also very important for people. And the other thing too is there are so many other things that had to have gone wrong for the backdoor to actually have been utilized. So again, get trusted apps from safe app stores, right? Like there are lots of good app stores out there. Get safe apps from safe app stores. Don't get third-party apps from third-party app stores unless you're getting them from a safe place that you can guarantee is trusted. But ultimately, I think it's important to realize that there are quite a few mistakes you have to make as a user for this to actually have been fully utilized. And so hopefully if you're following advice that we talk about, which is, buying trusted devices, using 2FA, like if some of you are using 2FA on a different device, for example, even if they stole your credentials and you did everything else wrong, they might not be able to get into your most sensitive accounts because you have, 2FA kept on a separate app or on a YubiKey or something like that. So we really like to encourage layering up on your protections because that is typically the most effective at stopping these attacks. It's very rare for an attack to be like a zero-click, just instant hack kind of attack. Normally it requires a few things to go wrong. So that's the advice I have to share with all of you. Really crazy story. Hopefully if you're doing things, overall well, you don't have to be concerned about this, but it's a good reminder to be aware of the devices that you purchase. And now we're going to go into the data breaches. So the first one is Toronto Zoo has shared an update on last year's ransomware attack from January. So it's been over 12 months. I'm a little upset about this because the ransomware attack pretty much took all systems offline, impacting their operations, visitor services, but they never really announced how this impacted users until now, like 13 months later. This impacted names, street addresses, phone numbers, and emails, last 4 digits of credit card numbers, and associated expiration dates. And the zoos actually revealed that the exposed info includes data about all guests and members who engaged in transactions between, get this, 2000, yes, the year 2000, and then April 2023, including general admission and membership purchases. So, Obviously, we have talked a lot about just the impact of ransomware in general, how it can take systems offline and kind of the repercussions this can have. We've talked about some like basic prepping stuff you should do. You don't know if your water is going to be hit by ransomware or your electricity. We just don't know these things. So always be cautious. But the second thing is try to have a more precautionary approach to privacy and security rather than a reactionary one. I also just want to publicly shame the Toronto Zoo for not really coming forward about this for what, 14 months? I don't know why it would take 14 months to get all of this information and at least give some basic advice and tips to help keep their own members potentially safe. So if I was a Toronto Zoo member, I would feel a lot less trusted being at that institution. All right, and now we're gonna go into the company news, and we're gonna start with PayPal, who is replacing 2FA codes with simple step login. So this simple step login is really focusing on passkeys. We've talked about passkeys. It's like passwordless. It uses FIDO. It uses the same stuff you're familiar with a hardware security key, but rather than it being 2FA, it's kind of just the way to get in. Now, the security feature will verify login in a single step, making it faster and easier to pay with PayPal. So how this is going to work is your existing passkey will be used for 2FA, eliminating the need for one-time codes. The passkey will be combined with a second action, such as face or fingerprint recognition to log in, and this update aims to reduce the number of authentication steps, making security more user-friendly. I think passkeys raise the bar slightly, but for all of you listening, you're probably better off just using, rather than a passkey, you're using that as your 2FA method, which it sounds like PayPal is still very open to allowing. So that is how I'd recommend, you use PayPal as securely as possible by generating a strong, unique password and combining that with something like a YubiKey or some kind of passkey that would be your 2FA. Now, quick warning, the article for that PayPal story also warns about a scam that's going around with Google search ads and phishing pages to impersonate PayPal. Nothing new here, like whatsoever. Anyone who's been on the internet has probably heard about some kind of PayPal scam. But just a good reminder that there are things like that out there, and for better or for worse, ad blockers nowadays have become a security tool. Which I hate saying because I know there's a lot of ethical considerations with blocking ads, but at the end of the day, for this podcast, ad blockers are a security tool, and that comes at the cost of ad revenue for this podcast, but there's just no way for us to get around that. So one more thing to keep in mind. I was mixed on including this next story because we used to maybe call these nothing burgers, like they haven't happened yet. We'd rather wait to see for something to happen. But I think given the team that's behind it, I felt more comfortable bringing it up. So Jolla founders are taking the wraps off an AI assistant to power up their push for privacy-friendly Gen AI. That's not my words. That's just a headline. I'm not as excited about it as the headline might seem. I'm not excited, but let me get into it. So the founders of Jolla, who for those of you who don't know Jolla, they are the people behind Sailfish OS, which is a mobile operating system that has some privacy and security considerations. They are now entering the AI assistant space with the similar focus of data protection. So they've introduced this new AI assistant called Mindy. This assistant is designed to be a fully private alternative to cloud giants, allowing users to integrate it with various apps and services to perform tasks and provide information. Now, part of this is they're releasing devices that I assume run this new assistant. It's called the Mind 2 Jolla AI device, which has 16 gigs of RAM, 128 gigs of memory, and a price tag of about 700 euros, though early adopters can apparently get a discount, and then the early bird pricing for the AI assistant is not free, but $10 per month after a 14-day free trial, with a final price of around $20 per month. Really quick story, Meta's bringing its anti-scam facial recognition test to the UK and Europe. It's like the UK and Europe fine Meta week 1, and then Meta tries to do some new thing over there that they get fined for the next week. And that's how we're able to continue this podcast each week, pretty much at this point. Obviously kidding, because there's a lot more stories, but I feel like Meta always gives us good news. So Meta's facial recognition anti-fraud test, which requires users to submit a video selfie for identity verification, is now being rolled out in the UK after regulatory approval. The features, which they note are optional, will be available to public figures in the UK and the EU in the coming weeks. This tech aims to combat fake accounts and automated bots, but it raises significant privacy concerns, particularly regarding the storage and use of biometric data. If you see this and you are somebody of any importance, that is the context behind it. Okay, this one really threw me off guard. It sounds really bad at first, but then you keep reading and you go, oh, okay, that's not as bad as it sounds. So 1Password offers geolocating help for bad apps that constantly log you out. So 1Password is a password manager. They are proprietary, though still very well regarded in the security and privacy community as a whole. But they've introduced this new feature. It's called Nearby. And this feature allows you to assign a geolocation to items stored in the vault. So this is designed to help you access frequently used apps, like those that constantly log them out, by providing a list of nearby logins. My first thought is I don't understand the point of this, but I now kind of get it. Like, there's an option to link things to, like, geolocations to Wi-Fi passwords, PIN codes, credit and debit cards, and other items. So theoretically, it's easier for you to access things. Like, let's say you go to your office and you frequently have to share an office Wi-Fi password. You can set up a geolocation for the Wi-Fi password, and it'll provide that a little bit more conveniently to you. I can't imagine myself using this, but a lot of people are probably already wondering, oh my gosh, this sounds like a privacy nightmare. So kind of the few things that they reassure users: one, location data is stored locally and not shared or tracked. It's completely on device. So that's a huge win. I'm glad they did that. Two, enterprise users, because 1Password has a huge enterprise market. Enterprise users' location data is not shared with employers, so employers aren't able to access this. This is only for you, even if it's an employer account. And then three, and this is the most important thing, the feature is optional. You don't have to use this. So my first reaction to this was, I don't understand why this exists, and I'm a little bit concerned because 1Password has a really good reputation. But after reading through it, both of those things are mostly resolved. I still don't really have a huge use case for this personally, but maybe someone does who's listening to this, and I feel like they've done it in a way that is implemented with good privacy and security. So yeah, that's pretty much the update there from 1Password. And now we're gonna dive into the research of the week, and we have some interesting stuff here. So we're gonna start with the first one, which is how Google tracks Android device users before they've opened any app. Really interesting stuff that really dives into, the kind of privacy you can expect on just a regular Android device. So this is from a professor at Trinity College Dublin. He's actually done a lot of other interesting stuff. Doug Leith, I've covered some of his research in the past, and he found that Google tracks Android users even before they open their first app. And this is done through various mechanisms, and I'll touch on those in a second. The important thing about all of this is that there's really no way to leave any of these forms of tracking without, a lot of workarounds and DIY stuff. So in terms of the tracking, the first thing is a DSID cookie, which is what he says is almost certainly the primary method Google uses to link analytics and advertising events, such as ad clicks, to individual users. This cookie is pretty much almost like a super cookie in a way, and it exists on device. And then this is combined with a Google Android ID, which is a device identifier that cannot be removed once it's created. And with these two things, they collect data on you as a user without your consent or without any kind of opt-out option that exists. So the Google Android ID, to dive a little bit more into that, is linked to a Google account and created after the first connection made to the device by Google Play services. It continues to send data about the device back to Google even after the user logs out of their Google account, and the only way to remove it and its data is to factory reset the device, which, if you're wondering, well, wouldn't I just get a new one? I believe the answer to that is yes. Obviously, the researcher says that this is by itself a privacy concern and should have people worried at least. And the second thing that he says is that there's no way to opt out of this or having them run in the first place. So there really is such little oversight over all of this kind of stuff on a regular Google Android device. And we'll talk about some alternatives in a second. Now, obviously, if you want to avoid all of these big tech companies, you need to use an operating system that doesn't include big tech companies and doesn't have these concerns. So if that is the route you want to go, then you probably want to look at custom operating systems on the Android side of things that either use something like Micro G or some other implementation of services that would allow you to not allow Google to get this kind of data from your device. But a really crazy story, and it's, I already hear a lot of the comments from the podcast saying, well, Google collects your data, duh. And it's like, yeah, we understand that, but knowing a little bit better how they do it is really important for mitigations, understanding what can't be mitigated, and also sharing with people exactly how it works. One thing is to sound like the crazy guy across the street pointing, at the sky and going, guys, the sky is green, you know? Another one is actually like proving that the sky is green. Now, kind of a bad analogy because this is the perspective of people thinking there's nothing wrong and that we're crazy for thinking that there's lots of privacy issues in the world. But again, rather than us trying to, be like the sky's green guys, and it sounds like we're just making crap up, actually citing research, giving evidence, and providing them to people and saying, look, this is why there are actual legitimate privacy concerns, and here are actual solutions that would resolve this, makes us a much more tangible and realistic fight that we can have and get other people on board with. So these stories are super important in normalizing privacy and educating people about privacy. And now we are going to get into politics. So Apple is launching a legal challenge to the UK backdoor order. So we talked last week or 2 weeks ago about how the UK has pressured Apple to build a backdoor. And specifically, I should add, for their advanced data protection, or ADP, which is their end-to-end encrypted offering in the iCloud suite. Now, Apple, rather than complying with this order, simply said, we're just going to pull ADP out altogether from the UK because we are not going to build an actual backdoor into the end-to-end encryption. Either we're going to roll out end-to-end encryption or we're not. And so they pulled it out, and I think the reactions were pretty mixed. Some people were like, well, Apple should fight this harder. Some people were saying, okay, Apple did the right thing here. Really all over the place. I covered this more on the Techlore side of things, both this update, if you want to get more of my thoughts, but also the original story, and we also covered it here on this podcast as well. So a lot of coverage that we've done on this across the board. The update here is it turns out that when Apple pulled ADP, they also began their fight legally against the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, which is the IPT. It's a judicial body that examines complaints against the UK security services. So Apple has formally come forward and is legally challenging this, which I believe is the first, if not one of the first times, that these kind of laws are actually being challenged in the UK. So this is pretty new, pretty novel. Good news and bad news. One, I don't know how successful it's going to be, so I think like the bad news side of it is I do think it's an uphill fight for Apple. The good news is I don't think any other company would have a better chance of winning than Apple in this situation. They have a metric hell of a lot of money out there, and they have some of the best lawyers and the best legal teams, and that's how they're able to do a lot of their damage. But when they are on your side for once, I think it's actually potentially a good thing. So this has begun, and actually it's kind of sad because we don't even know yet if we're going to know the result of this court case. All of this happens behind closed doors. We don't know what's going to happen, or maybe we will, but we just don't know what's going to happen as of right now. So we might get updates to this, we might not, but I'm sure at some point something's going to have to come to light and be public, and we will cover it in this podcast. So stay subscribed. Up next, really quick story. There's not too much going on with this yet, but Canada has launched a probe for X's, or Twitter's, use of personal data in AI models training. This is in relation to the use of Canadians' personal data to train AI models, and the probe will focus on X's compliance with federal privacy law, specifically around the collection, use, and disclosure of personal information for the training. And this follows a complaint that was received by the office, so they are following some kind of complaint that someone sent in. All these big tech companies have overall, I think, done a poor job in releasing their AI models and releasing their AI features in a privacy-respecting way, but I do think that X/Twitter has done it in almost the worst way that I've seen, which is just auto-enabling it and auto-including people in the training. So if you just have a Twitter account and you logged in, they just automatically enabled training on your account, and you had to go into the settings and go through like several submenus to find it and turn it off. So I know I posted on Twitter through the Techlore account, like, hey guys, like turn this off in your Twitter accounts, but if you didn't follow us or you didn't follow anyone else who made this public, your account probably still does this. So if you have a Twitter account for whatever reason, please go in there and disable the training if you care about your privacy. Hopping back to the UK now. So, the UK is trying to do the whole end-to-end encryption thing against Apple and building a backdoor, but the UK still wants to reassure you that they are concerned about child privacy concerns. So they're probing TikTok and Reddit and for potential violations of child privacy laws, and they're focusing on whether these platforms are adequately protecting children's data and ensuring their safety online. So the message is simple. This is a quote from the UK Information Commissioner. If social media and video sharing platforms want to benefit from operating in the UK, they must comply with data protection law. The responsibility to keep children safe online lies firmly at the door of the companies offering these services, and my office is steadfast in its commitment to hold them to account. Obviously, no one's going to say that data privacy laws towards children are a bad thing. I think there's a lot of things that TikTok and Reddit could probably do to help protect children's privacy online. I just find this all very hypocritical when it's the same government that's going after encryption, which is also a very tool that could be used to keep children safer online as well. I don't think children are safer if they have to use a messenger that can have a backdoor that anybody can access, and then people are able to access sensitive data about children through the things they message, or files that they're keeping, or things that they're doing in school. Like, all that stuff should be private information for children as well. So it's a very hard thing to balance. There's a lot of discussion, and it's just a very weird time right now of people trying to figure out who to hold accountable. Do we hold app stores accountable for hosting apps? Do we hold the apps / the companies / services like TikTok and Reddit accountable? Do we not hold any of them accountable, and we leave it in the responsibility of parents to deal with this? There's just a lot of big questions here that are still unfolding, and I'm still kind of trying to figure out how I stand on it. And I don't know many people who have fully made up their minds, but I think it's actually a bit concerning when someone comes forward and they said, I've made up my mind, this is what I think the problem is, because I think it's a much more complicated issue than that. And it speaks to me that someone might not fully understand and appreciate how complex the issue is if they think that there's just one thing to target to solve all of this problem. Great way to end that, because now we're going over to the state of Utah, who has passed App Store age verification bill, despite constitutional concerns. So Utah has decided app stores are the problem, not individual services. So what Utah's doing here, and actually before I get into the story, for the sources, I'm including a source from the Chamber of Progress. Sounds like a great organization, and they might be on the right side of the story because it seems like they oppose this bill. But I just want to make it clear, they are notoriously not an organization that fights for you, the user. They fight for companies and big tech. All of their partners are big tech companies like Apple, Google, Amazon, Meta, Lyft, Uber, and countless more. You can view them on their website. It's not hidden. And even the person who runs the Chamber of Progress has a history with big tech companies. So I just want to make it clear, I do not like this organization, but they are on the right side of this story, even if for the wrong reasons, because we'll get into it in a sec. So to cover the bill, so the Utah State Legislature has advanced a bill, which is SB 0142, to Governor Spencer Cox, requiring app stores, like Apple's App Store, to verify the identity and age of all users. This move raises concerns about online privacy, First Amendment rights, and potential harm to at-risk youth. It's important to mention that similar legislation was previously blocked by a federal judge due to constitutional concerns. I want to make this very clear that this is essentially like a light KYC to download software. Now, what I personally would love to see in this situation, I think that this is a very dangerous bill. It sets a very dangerous precedent. I think that there already is a big privacy risk in having a company like Apple see and keep and not have a way to remove every app you've ever downloaded. The apps that you install tell a lot about you, and I think that's something that not many people think about. What's even worse than that is having to tie that to an identity. Theoretically, I could say, well, you can set up an Apple account with alias information and it's not tied to an individual. But that might quickly change if they now have to essentially KYC all users, which I want to really outline here. If you want to see if somebody's a child, you have to verify the identity of all users, not just children. In my book, a perfect situation is something like some kind of open source standard that is used by any company that chooses to use it to verify identities. So this is something that might be done locally, offline, that is open source, that's an open standard that anybody can use and integrate into their software. I think that would be the best way to do anything like this if this is the direction that the world seems to be going in. But I don't see many discussions about that. I see mostly these proprietary company-focused services. In the US, the IRS uses a private company like ID.me to do this kind of stuff, rather than trying to just develop an open standard that can be used by all Americans and is something that could be open source, transparent, which aligns with what something like taxpayer money should be used for. So I wish that there were more discussions about creating some kind of trusted way to verify identities, so that way people on the privacy side of things could be happier, and then people who think that this will protect children could also be happier as well. The next story comes from India, and they say that your email and social media account can be accessed by income tax officers starting the financial year 2026 and 2027. So the income tax department in India will gain these new powers starting April 1st of 2026 to access social media, emails, and digital spaces with the aim to curb tax evasion. So the change is part of the new income tax bill, which obviously has raised many privacy concerns. So the key points here, so income tax authorities will have the authority to access social media, emails, and digital spaces. They will also have search and seizure powers over assets and documents. Experts warn of challenges to fundamental privacy rights without judicial oversight and procedural safeguards. And these new powers have raised questions about the constitutionality and potential impact on individual privacy. So I do feel like money, finances, taxes are kind of where, there might be more justification for this kind of stuff, right? But we always have to remember that there's so much potential for abuse and overreach, and it's just extremely difficult, and there's lots of legal and ethical implications for the government accessing this kind of data. Any person in India who has more context on this story, definitely let me know. But overall, fairly concerning and something that you should all keep an eye on. And we are going to talk more about social media presence in the next story, so I'll save my thoughts for that story. The next story is that the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS, is increasing its scrutiny of social media accounts as part of the vetting process for immigration applications. So what they're going to do is they're going to scan social media posts of non-citizens applying for immigration benefits, including naturalization, green cards, and asylum status. The proposed rules have a 60-day comment period ending on May 5th. So if you have concerns about this, speak up. Now, the screening is intended to identify potential security risks, including those who advocate for or support designated foreign terrorists. The move has raised concerns about a potential chilling effect on immigrants' social media usage. They estimate that analyzing social media posts will require an additional 285,000 hours per year. I had to read that number to make sure I got it right. There's a few things here. One, there is big potential for bias and discrimination, of course. If, whoever the agent is, if they see something that might not go along with what they believe to be true or what they believe to be okay, they could deny an application, or this could be something that's used on even a broader level as a systemic kind of bias or discrimination, like if they criticize a political figure, then they're not allowed in. So obviously that is a big concern there. There also is the concern for individual privacy and freedom of expression. So it's really hard to balance, national security and also freedom of expression and people's rights. Kind of the takeaways, this plus the previous story, remember that your social media presence speaks a lot about you. You can get denied or approved for your job, for immigration status, or you could be arrested. Like, there are so many things that can happen from what you post on the internet. It might sound like it's, just out there, it's nothing because it's just digital and it's not in front of your face, but that stuff can really jeopardize you. So always be careful with what you post on social media. Try to keep things as clean as you can. Just assume it's public, even if it's private. And also encourage you to post things that are kind of like more universally acceptable things to post. Obviously, I don't want to take away, if you want to, express yourself and you want the freedom of expression, you can do that. Just be aware that if it's tied to you and your name, there could be consequences to that in the long run, depending on what your goals are. So feel free to attach that to your name. Obviously, we do that almost every day with what we do, and we share our expression for privacy, for security. But there are things that we don't do back here, both Nate and myself. There are things that we don't touch on publicly, and we keep that to ourselves, and that's what privacy is all about. It's choosing what you want to share with the world and what you don't want to share with the world. So actually take advantage of that right by keeping some things private to yourself as well. And now we're going to go into the open source section, FOSS, and we're going to meet Ray Hunter for the first story, which is a new open source tool from the EFF to detect cellular spying. So this open source tool will detect and analyze cell site simulators, also known as stingrays or IMSI catchers. If you've never heard of these devices are essentially fake cell phone towers that are designed to just gather information about nearby cell phones, like like your phone, which includes location, unique identifiers, and possibly even more sensitive things like any SMS messages, phone calls, etc. In the past, these have commonly been used to track protesters or, identify people later. So if there's 100 protesters at an event and they want to identify them, they can essentially use these cell site simulators to gather that information and then identify those people later. So be very careful with this kind of stuff, and it is a lot more prevalent than you might think, and that's why this tool was developed. So Ray Hunter runs on an affordable mobile hotspot, and it analyzes control traffic between the hotspot and the cell tower, and it will detect suspicious events like attempting to downgrade the connection to 2G or request IMSI numbers under suspicious circumstances. The user is then notified and can access logs for further review. Quick note on the 2G thing, on many Android devices nowadays, you can actually disable 2G outright as part of this IMSI protection, and on iOS that is also a setting, and it actually is a forced enabled setting if you use Apple's lockdown mode. One of the very subtle and cool things that Apple decided to implement with lockdown mode to keep their users more secure. If you're capable of running this tool, I highly recommend it. The more people that run it, the better it will be. Really cool project. I really like when the EFF makes cool software and cool things. Good stuff from the EFF. Check it out in the show notes. Really quick story. Mullvad, very underground, underrated service that people don't really know that they do is Mullvad Leta, which is their search engine. So this actually is a Google and Brave search proxy service. So it's supposed to be like a privacy respecting alternative to Google. I personally tried it and I found it to be very bare bones and not really usable. Last I tried it, I don't even think it had image support. I don't know if that's changed. Not a huge fan of it, but it used to require a paid Mullvad account and you had to be connected to a Mullvad VPN server to get in. But now it is free and open to all. And so that is the update. So you can now go ahead and try Mullvad, see if it works for you. And I think it's already listed in the Techlore resources, so it's already been there as a recommendation. Now, I have two more open source stories. The first one is a bad one. The next one is the good one. So we'll finish open source on a positive note. So the first one is that threat actors are using a technique called typo squatting to distribute malware posing as legitimate Go packages. And this is on Linux and Mac OS. So these researchers have identified 7 malicious packages impersonating popular libraries like Hypert and Layout, which can install malware on Linux and Mac OS systems. And once this is done, it can execute remote code, fetch and execute ELF-based malware, and even download and run malicious scripts. So some key points here. One, typo squatting involves creating malicious packages with names similar to legit ones. So you might, go to a GitHub repo and the GitHub repo looks the same and just has a slightly different URL or a different name. The real prevention here is to obviously be careful with what you're installing. You, as a developer, can protect yourself. You can use real-time scanning tools, code audits, and careful dependency management. But I think ultimately just being careful with where you're installing things is going to be the most important thing, and just consider the importance of software supply chain security and as promised, the good news, your Android phone will run Debian Linux soon, and some Pixels already can. Now, really cool story, so listen up here. So Google introduced a native Linux terminal application in the March 2025 Pixel feature drop, which allows users to run Debian Linux on their Android devices. This is currently available on all the latest Pixel devices running Android 15, and it's expected to expand to all sufficiently robust Android phones with the release of Android 16. Now, you might be wondering what this is, and let's dive into that. So this will run Debian Linux on Android devices, and it accesses a shell interface directly on the device, which can download, configure, and run Debian. Now, it does lack support for GUI applications, so this isn't like running a whole VM on your phone, but you can run a shell, so you have pretty much like a Debian server on your phone. Now, in the future, they plan to enable running desktop Linux programs from Android devices. Super cool. And support for GUI apps is expected in Android 16. So we actually will get that kind of hypothetical not too far from now. Google is testing new external display management tools to bring Android closer to traditional desktop operating systems. The formal terminology for this is called smartphone desktop convergence. So it's the idea of bridging the smartphone and the desktop to be on one device, or just making them, more intermixed. So theoretically, this could replace laptops with large Android phones and tablets, or hell, even just your Android phone. You could get home and plug it into a docking station and then run Linux software on your phone. So this could, and again, could, mark the beginning of a new, lightweight, hybrid smartphone desktop operating system. And we've actually already seen some cool features on the Android side of things that do this kind of thing on both Samsung and Pixel devices, where you can plug in your phone to a monitor and it will actually have like cool monitor specific features, and it will hook up to like a keyboard. So we've already seen some things like this, and so this is just continuing that direction. I love this concept, and it's actually one of the big concepts that you see on these Linux devices like the PinePhone and the Librem 5, which is they're just a whole Linux desktop operating system, and they have a mobile version, but you can plug them in and make them essentially a Linux desktop. Really cool concept. Love this. Could be the future of computing. Don't know yet. But I do think that this could be big. And now we are in the Misfits, and we have two stories, and neither of them disappoint, let me tell you. So the first one is that an undocumented command was found in Bluetooth chips that were used by billions of devices. Now, when I originally read this story, it was labeled as a backdoor, and then I think people got pissed at that classification, so then they got rid of the word backdoor in the headline, and they said, sorry, we shouldn't have labeled it a backdoor, though it does seem like a backdoor in some ways, so just kind of messy there. Anyway, this is a discovery by Spanish researchers that have revealed undocumented commands in the ESP32 microchip used by over 1 billion with a B devices that could be exploited for attacks. Now, these commands include spoofing of trusted devices, so you could just spoof a different device, unauthorized data access, pivoting to other devices on the network, and establishing long-term persistence, which you can pretty much do almost anything with. The vulnerability was tracked as CVE 2025-27840, and of course, dig more into that in the show notes, and it was discovered using a new C-based USB Bluetooth driver developed by the researchers. The issue may allow malicious implementations on the OEM level and supply chain attacks, and could be exploited via rogue Bluetooth connections or physical access to the device's USB or UART interface. I think one of the most interesting risks that are involved outside of the ones I've covered is that this could spread to other devices via Bluetooth attacks, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. And this last story was honestly probably my favorite of the week. It was just really interesting to read about. And I wanted to kind of leave you with an interesting story. This is called polymorphic extensions, and it's a sneaky extension that can impersonate any browser extension. I really had to like break down this article a little bit more to give you all the attack flow and like describe to you how it works, because it's pretty cool. So just to give you some context, a polymorphic extension is a malicious browser extension that can impersonate another installed extension, making it difficult for users to detect them. These create pixel-perfect replicas of the target extension's icon, and it looks identical, and it gets you to provide sensitive information. Let me walk you through the attack flow so you can see and honestly appreciate how crazy this attack is. So first, there is a social engineering component. So the attacker creates a polymorphic extension and publishes it on the Chrome store, and they use social engineering tactics to persuade the victim to download and pin the extension. So to dive into this step a little bit more, this is just step one, and I have steps within step one. So first, they, again, create and publish an actual extension on the Chrome store, which is disguised as something like an AI marketing tool. So there's all these random things, these random extensions that do just one specific thing, and theoretically, any of those could actually be a disguised polymorphic extension. Now keep in mind that these tools actually should do what they're supposed to do. Like if there's an AI marketing tool, it probably does do some AI marketing crap on it, right? Like it's not just a complete scam, but there's a hidden underside, because since it actually does what it does and it builds your trust, it's going to also do a pop-up that appears to prompt the user, you, to pin the extension for a better experience. And then everything functions as promised, providing AI marketing capabilities to the victim to stay under the radar. That's step one. You just installed an extension and everything seems fine. Now, step two is, very targeted, and it needs to identify a target extension to attack. So they're going to use something called the Chrome Management API, or they're going to hit web resources to identify which extension to impersonate. So in my view, probably the most targeted extension is going to be something like a password manager. So you're looking at things like 1Password, Proton Pass, Bitwarden, or possibly something like privacy.com, or anything else that handles sensitive data. This extension that you installed is going to go through your other extensions and see if there's a good one to target. Now, that's step two. Step three is where things get really juicy. The extension is going to morph into a perfect replica of the target extension at the right time, prompting you to enter sensitive information. So let's just say it's going to target Proton Pass as a good example. So it's going to essentially replicate Proton Pass. It's going to look exactly like Proton Pass. It's going to copy the code. It's going to essentially change the entire extension to look like Proton Pass. And then when you try to log in, it's going to say, oh, you're signed out of your Proton Pass account. Please log in again. And then when you log in again, you're actually submitting it to the malicious extension that previously was an AI marketing tool. And then from there, the attacker gains access to the victim's sensitive information, including passwords and secret keys. Crazy attack. I would love to know how many people have been impacted by this, but really big reminder that some of this stuff is really crazy, guys. Like, the amount of time and effort and complexity that goes into these attacks is insane. That you need to be aware of the extensions that you install. These extensions have a lot of things. It's probably one of the most attacked vectors that we've seen in the privacy and security space to collect data and hack into people's accounts across the board. Extensions are just really poor. I also think it's pretty terrible how there is nothing mentioned here about in any way trying to put blame on the Chrome store in itself. Like, does Google not have a responsibility here in the apps that you install from the Chrome store, which you assume are trusted and safe? So I think that there's a lot of people to blame here, but I'm going to give you all actionable steps because that is all I can control and all you can control, which is be aware of the extensions that you're installing. Only install things you need to do. Ideally, you get them from the official website as well. You know, like, if you're a Proton Pass user, please just go to the Proton Pass website, go to install or download, and see where they actually list the extension link. Click that link, install the extension, and be done with it. And only install as many extensions as you realistically need. You don't need an AI marketing tool as a browser extension. There's lots of individual services you can do for that. I think that people should see installing an extension as serious as like installing like a third-party integration in their password manager at this point. Like, it's that kind of sensitivity that you're dealing with when you have extensions. So, good reminder, really cool attack. I don't think it's like something that's been mass deployed to like millions of people, but super cool nonetheless, and a good reminder to keep yourself safe online. And that is all the stories. Again, we had that 1 million Android devices secret backdoor thing. Apple is fighting a UK backdoor order, and then Canada's privacy watchdog is probing X for its use of personal data. And we had a lot of other interesting stories this week. Really big week, and we couldn't have done it without our sponsor this week, which is SimpleX, the messenger. And again, they are a security and privacy first, end-to-end encrypted, audited, open source messenger that requires no unique identifiers to sign up. No phone numbers, no emails, nothing. Fully decentralized, so you can host your own server. And really cool update. Version 6.3 was just released a couple days before recording this, and they have some new things like preventing spam and abuse in public groups. They have group improvements, like you can mention members and improve performance. There are lots of privacy and security improvements, and this is my favorite part, this is why I brought it up, server builds are now reproducible. The commitment that SimpleX has had to privacy and security is pretty awesome, to the point where we've actually created a sister community of surveillance support for our patrons and people who support this podcast. So if you are one of our patrons or supporters, you can actually, I already did a PSA inside the group, but just DM either Nate or myself, and then we will go ahead and let you into the SimpleX side of things. And of course, if you're listening and you join that, we'd love to have you in those groups as well. We're on both Signal and SimpleX, though SimpleX is now officially the more private and more secure place to chat with other people who like this podcast. That is it for the week. If you love this podcast, it really helps a lot when people leave a rating, leave a comment, leave a review. We do see those. We do really enjoy reading them. And it also helps us perform better in any algorithms out there to reach more people with privacy, security, and how to keep them safer online. So we really appreciate all of that. And if you really like what we're doing, there's ways to support us financially, but there's also many ways to support us by just liking, engaging, and being a part of things and sharing the content around. See you next time on Surveillance Support, where hopefully myself and Nate will be back.